Hello and welcome to Android Developers Backstage. I'm Tor Norby from the Android Tools and Libraries team.
I'm Chet Haas from my home office.
Hi, I'm Raluca Saucic from the Android Studio team.
Hi, I'm Eugene Yakavets from Android Studio team.
Yeah, so we have some engineers from Android Studio today, and we're going to talk about...
A surprise! So Tor was responsible for bringing in guests, and somehow he latched onto the idea of bringing in people from the tools team.
Yeah, I know. First time.
Yeah. No, I don't know why we didn't think of this before.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about agent mode again.
Yay.
This is, I think, our third episode on the topic over the last couple of years, but we're going to talk about a new feature that we just shipped to Canary called Bring Your Own Model, BYOM. Do you want to explain what that feature is?
Yeah, so the feature is to allow to Android Studio to talk to a different model, not only Gemini. So a lot of developers have models provided by their organization, so they kind of restricted what they can use. So we allow those developers to still benefit from all the agent in Android Studio while using their model backend.
Yeah, so we rebranded Studiobot, which was the original name of our AI feature, to Gemini in Android Studio, and now you can use other models than Gemini. It's a little complicated. So how did you
Gemini,
deal with that?
Not Gemini.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big Gemini icon next to every reply from Gemini. How did you deal with that?
Strike through? Does it just like strike out the Gemini thing when it in the tab? Like how do you? Yeah, from a branding perspective, it's confusing. But okay, so technically, do you talk to Gemini through an API?
Branding wise, we changed it.
Okay.
Right? So that you're not getting the Gemini icon next to some other model. Yeah. And took out the word Gemini. So it says AI in most places, but only once you've switched, right? So if you go and configure other modules, and let's talk about that actually. How do you do this as a user? What's the mechanism you use in the latest canaries if you want to try to use some other model?
So the mechanism is you basically bring your API key. It's either could be Gemini API key or like third-party API key. So you provide endpoint to connect to, provide API key, and fetch a list of models, and then you could select your models in an agent chat.
Okay, so API key I get. That must mean there's an API. Does that mean that like all the prompts are going through like a standard prompt API that all of these models use? So for example, before BYOM, the really awkward acronym. Can we latch onto a 3-letter? Before BYOM, you would just talk directly to Gemini, and then I wouldn't really think you would need an API. But are you using the same API now, and now you just make these prompt API calls to other models?
If only it were so simple. Actually, yes, there are a bunch of models that talk through the same API. Not all of them, right?
So most of them uses OpenAI API.
So this was an API that they introduced first and everybody else just glommed onto the same thing?
Yeah, but there's still a lot of complexity because API only specify over-the-wire protocol.
What was that? Only specify what?
Over-the-wire protocol, how data is serialized, how your request is serialized. And then there's still each model or model provider have own logic or validation or how model operates. So it's a lot of integration work. Now it's not only, before that it was only Gemini model, so you kind of adapt your program to work with Gemini. Now you have like a matrix of model providers multiplied by different models. Yeah, pretty much all of them have own nuances, so you need to adapt your code to work with all of them.
So job security for the entire tools team.
So we have Bring Your Own Model. We also have something called Bring Your Own Key. And it's related. So when you use Studio, all you have to do is log in, and then we give you access to a default model. We call it the default model. But if you have an API key from AI Studio, you can also use that to fetch additional models and switch. So that's the first level of indirection, right? It's the Gemini models. And that's how you're going to get Gemini 3.
Right. So
as soon as that arrives.
Yeah, I think I've used this. Well, yeah, you get the default model and all of those, you can do whatever you want for free. But then I had a key for whatever level I had subscribed to, and then I could plug that in and get some difference. I wasn't exactly sure what the difference was, but that was all Gemini based.
Still, yeah, that's right.
All right. And now?
And the Bring Your Own Model is the one, we have two versions. There's the local models, and then there's the remote models. And we actually launched local models first. And so there we support several providers. Do you want to talk, what other providers we support?
So we designed specifically to make sure that the providers as LM Studio and Ollama works. So that's kind of two most popular ones.
So you install LM Studio or Ollama, and you download models, and then what?
And then you configure them in Studio, and you could use them totally offline without any internet connection.
Okay, so to configure them, you go into settings.
Yeah.
And
settings, I think it's now called AI and model providers.
Model providers. So that's what we're calling the level of indirection is model providers. So you have models and you have providers. So you can get the model provider for, say, LM Studio or Ollama, and that's the one that provides additional specific models. So you configure that, and now you can access all your local models.
So you said specifically local. Is this for not just a different model, but I want this model to run local without sharing any information outside of my host machine?
That's right. It can. In fact, when I've demoed this, and I just did this at DroidCon, I turn off the Wi-Fi.
Name dropping here.
Yeah. So basically, it works offline, which is. I mean, I'm not lying. I did this. I was on the plane, no Wi-Fi. And I was able to use this model. I used the one that's 20 billion parameters. It's not nearly as good as the state-of-the-art models, but it's good enough that it's useful for a number of things. Not just doing agent things, but I even had a question about an API, and it had enough, even though I couldn't access the internet to Google this, it had enough information in its model training to actually answer the question. So it has some value too. Though I think the main value proposition is probably privacy for some people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Corporate policies and stuff.
Yeah. If you really are like, no one can ever see this code, well, you could use a local model.
Okay. All right. So that was the first step, was give people a way to have a local model. And then there's a step beyond that, which is just more general models that don't happen to be Gemini.
Yeah. So that's what we just recently launched at DroidCon. And so we have support for the OpenAI protocol. And then Raluca, you worked on the Anthropic model, right?
Yes, I picked that up.
Yeah. So tell me more about that.
It's a very nice API, to be honest. What I appreciate in particular is the support for image and other binary blob types. And this is done throughout. So not only can you attach images to a query, but you can call tools that return images, screenshots.
And this is very useful because in Android, our agent is doing this a lot. We have part of our strategy is to have agents that are doing Android-specific things, right? So for example, one of the things we showed was you can now have the agent driving your app, looking at Logcat, that's text, easy, but also grabbing screenshots and then looking at the screen. And if the model is multimodal, which Anthropic also is, well, now it can look at that and conclude like, oh, I need to click on the button over there to drive through the app, for example.
So multimodal, that's one of those terms I had to learn last year when I started playing with this. That is the ability to deal with like text as well as images
and audio,
artifacts, right?
Yeah.
And there's also the thing, I think this came online maybe a year ago. It was before all the direct agent integration stuff of uploading a screenshot and having it write code or suggest code for the UI that it saw in the screenshot, right? So you can do that all through the Anthropic API, but not through the OpenAI API for now, or is it just different?
Yeah, it's also available, but it's like API itself, it's not that nice. It's whatever they have for Java implementation.
So actually, I wanted to dive into the API. What do these APIs look like? Like in my mind, it's kind of it's an API equivalent of JavaScript. Like everything is just a string. Like here's a prompt. Like, yeah, I like that look you gave me. Obviously, I'm completely ignorant here, so try to help me understand. What is an API for a model?
Well, it has to support the basic operations of constructing a prompt, where a prompt is a collection of chunks that can be a system prompt, a user message, an assistant message, all the attachments. So we just discussed about images, but you can also attach documents like PDF documents.
Okay.
So you need an API to construct that out of the basic building blocks of text, image, chunk, binary. You need an API to send the request and then stream back the responses or get the response in a single shot.
Okay.
And then you need to specify, of course, all sorts of configuration parameters. How many output tokens do you really want the response to be in the max or worst case scenario? Whether you want to enable thinking or not. Whether the model is powerful enough to support thinking.
Thinking. You mean something different by that word than I do. What is thinking in this world?
Let me take a step back. So when you ask the model something, if that something is a complex task that will require maybe multiple chained tool calls and the model looking around and then making other changes based on, what it's doing at that point, thinking is a way to tether it to a line of reasoning. So the model will have an initial plan, but then without thinking, it might diverge from that initial plan because at some point it might run into the weeds with some refactoring that doesn't work, breaks compilation, and then the model is stuck, not able to build the project anymore and continue. But thinking is, here is the initial plan, and here are the reasoning steps at each point. And then after each tool call, you have the responsibility to pass back all the thinking blocks to the model in the query. So all these thinking blocks are preserved in the trajectory of the interaction so that the model knows what were the initial thoughts and how it got there and what are the next steps that it should do. So it grounds it in a trajectory.
And just from the user interface perspective, it used to be that in Studio, it would say, you would type a query and it would say waiting for Gemini.
Yeah.
And you would wait 15, 20 seconds.
Yeah.
When we added thinking support, it starts saying what it's doing. So now frequently it'll say if you say, for example, add comments to this file, it'll say for understanding the code. And then after forming.
The user has asked about this file.
So basically the model is encouraged to emit its thoughts, which we display. So as you're looking at this long operation, you're getting way more, feedback.
Yeah.
Those are thinking thought bubbles.
I was thinking it was just random and that maybe some of these times it should just say, can I tell you a joke? Maybe I'll sing you a song. Just because it's just spinning its wheels, kind of waiting to hear back from the
No, I think once they added thinking models, it's basically a way to have the model, be more conscious or specific about what it's doing, and it actually has better results that way. It's if you just ask it, hey, what is 5 + 5? It's going to do better if you say, show your work.
Yeah,
it's going to do a better job.
So the thinking, the way you were describing it, Raluca, was reminding me that one of the things I've seen often is getting the context to the model so that it knows what happened before. And this happens in two ways. One is any prompt that I give it is going to be in the context of the conversation that we've been having for the last 2 hours, right? But also, if I start Studio the next day, I'll see it emit this huge text stream of all the prompts that were in there before. And a couple of questions is, how often do you need to remind the model of that context? Is it on every single prompt? Oh, by the way, here's all the stuff that's happened. Does that happen in an ongoing conversation of prompts? And also when you start the tool and I see this emission of all this blob of text, are you actually telling the model, by the way, here's a conversation that the user had yesterday? And then how does that bubble up to the API level? How do you know how much you need to emit, how much context you're giving? When does it stop? When does it stop, the thinking mode in several step replies? When do you know when it's done? That was a lot of questions in there. I'm sorry. Maybe I should break it down. You know what? If I have a plan, why don't we execute the plan one by one, and then we'll think. All right, go ahead.
Okay. So first of all, yes, if you open Studio and you already had a conversation with a model the previous day and you keep adding to that conversation, we have to send back the whole thing.
Yeah.
It might be problematic if you have changed the models in between. That'll be for an interesting bug.
This is something that I didn't understand about large language models in the beginning. I naively thought back when I used Bard in 2023, whatever it was, that there was a state on the server.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And I learned later, no. Every time you add a new question, we send the entire thing again. Okay. So it's basically going given this history, what's the next thing you would predict? And you do that over and over and over again. That's how it works.
More and more expensive. If you're charged on the amount of text that you're sending back and forth or the number of prompts or whatever, aren't you paying more and more and more the longer the conversation
we
goes?
used to just truncate and now we have context compression, right? And that's what every agent does. Like, so when you get towards the end, you go, because the input window is limited. So the really old stuff, you start compressing, with AI.
Okay.
But we also support having multiple conversations. So hopefully the users have the mental model that if you want to ask something entirely unrelated to the current conversation, you start a new chat thread.
Or just type /clear. That's
I wonder, like, at what point do you clear it? And if you're having multiple conversations, is that a new tab? Do I, like, open up a new agent?
No. There's a plus button now. This is another new feature that we just launched, right? There's a plus button above the conversation window, and that'll just, it has this almost the same visual effect as /clear, like it wipes out the window.
Yeah.
But you can also, on the button next to the plus button, go back to all your previous conversations, and it'll bring them back in. So,
Okay, so it does clear it. So the thing that you just created will start with zero context.
Yeah, that's right.
But at any point, you could go to a previous one, which means it's going to re-emit all of that stuff. So
not to the AI, just brings it back into the window, right? Until you do something.
Oh, okay. Until you ask a prompt, and then it says, by the way, here's the stuff we talked about for the last 2 years. One of the things I've noticed, it was kind of funny, like it went off in the weeds at one point. I can't remember why, but I decided, you know what, just stop trying to fix that build problem. What I really want you to work on is this. And we proceeded down that path. And then eventually, like, it got bored of me. And it's like, oh, I'm going to go back to that build problem, because it kept sending the context of this stuff that I had, long ago said, don't stop doing that. So it's interesting to have having the complete context, as opposed to, like, in our brains, we have the limited context of only the things that matter. And then the trick is, how does the model figure out, of the many conversations we've had, which ones actually matter at any moment? Not your problem. That's the model's problem. But
it's like you're lobbying up these things, because another feature we launched is planning mode, and it's basically meant to address this, right? Where these models tend to get off on a tangent.
Yeah.
The planning mode it basically means that up front it'll make a plan. And so you get a special nice plan UI, at the bottom of the agent window showing you, I'm on step 3 out of 7 or whatever. Sure, that's nice feedback to you, but the real benefit is we keep the AI on track, because it is reminded, of the overall goal and where it's at and so on. So this really helps make the agent more attentive to the final goal, not just whatever it's getting really excited about.
And that's the one that you were talking about, right?
No, that's separate.
So thinking is separate from planning.
Yes.
So, thinking would be sort of the iteration through the plan that was created, right? Or is this totally separate?
My understanding is that thinking is a model feature. It's a backend feature. Some models have it, some don't.
Okay.
Smaller models, local models will probably not have thinking.
Yeah.
So it's something that you can implement. It's very well supported, so it gives you the opportunity to do prompt caching on the backend. So you're not actually paying for a lot of the tokens that you would be paying for otherwise. The thinking blocks, for example, in the Anthropic API, are removed, all of the previous thinking blocks. So the actual prompt being sent to the model does not include all the previous thinking blocks. So there are optimizations for the context size. But if you don't have that, then on the client side, we can do a much better universal planning tool that would work with all models, would not depend on, do you have prompt caching enabled, because that might be expensive. We might consume more tokens that way because we have to send a plan and remind the model, this is the plan.
Yeah.
But this works for all models.
Okay. So how do you, I guess this is related to the problem of how do you deal with random models that people are giving you keys for, given that they don't all have the same capabilities? For example, you're using Studio and you really want to supply an image for the UI, but you're using a model that has no idea what you're talking about. Maybe that's not the case. Do they all have the same base level properties that Studio depends on?
Too bad, so sad.
Yeah. Okay, but then does it know immediately, like, oh, the model you're using does not support this?
Yeah, I think that we basically know if they support multimodal, right?
Yeah, you'll get error from Sarah and you display it on a Studio, like present to users. So there will be some way to diagnose it. There is some heuristic baked into Studio when we detect some stuff is not supported and switch to try to do another stuff. But it's
plus the features could know up front as well, right? So I don't know if we actually have done this. I hope we have. That there's an attach image button right there, and I'm hoping that that's not I actually think that we implemented this. That you don't get the attach image button when you're talking to a non-supporting model, I think. Because the button used to not appear, until you had a model that was capable, because in the beginning we didn't have multimodal.
I just keep attaching a image of me. It hasn't really helped my apps at all. I thought, why does it keep asking for a headshot? Okay, all right, here it is.
Yeah.
And then it's like its responses are very confusing.
Yeah. No, I get it.
So I had asked like so many API questions all within one prompt. What happens when like it's going to take a while? It's like I've had that happen several times where it's like, here's some information and I'm thinking about this other thing, and then here's some other information, and it's not the thinking thing you were talking about. It's like it's just like trying to give me a complicated answer in several parts, or maybe it sort of sent off a build to make sure that the Gradle sync is going to work, and then in the meantime it's doing that. Like, is that what's the API level for that? Like, do you get a response that says, by the way, I have more to say, and then to wait around for another callback to display that information?
I don't think that, but I think that for complex queries you're encouraged to use the streaming API. And that means you will be displaying incrementally token by token what the model is trying to do, instead of waiting for a minute to display the whole thing.
Okay.
So there is at least some visual indication of progress. Something is happening. With tool calls, it's easy because tool calls happen locally and we display, of course.
And then you're done, right? And then there's some indicator that you're finished when it reaches the end of the stream. So when it's actually done thinking, and then you're ready for the next one.
There's in the query, there's a stop button. Yeah. While it's running, we call it the thinker. There is a progress bar saying, waiting for Gemini, or if it's making a tool call, we actually show what it's doing with the tool call, like, deploying app.
Yeah.
Or we also show the thoughts there. So the thoughts are never shown as verbatim text.
Okay.
We had that in an earlier build, but we just switched it. So it's only the thinker, the progress bar, that shows the thoughts.
Okay.
And that's going to be there until it's done. And when that goes away, the stop button is disabled, and now time to enter another query.
But so there's space for a joke. I'm just saying.
Yes.
Could try that. Okay, so another API question. Sorry. These are APIs that apps could be using directly as well. Like, obviously you're using the API. Like, I, as a developer using Android Studio to build my Android app, am not using these model APIs. Android Studio is, right? But are these also the APIs that developers would use if they are integrating agent logic or ML logic into their application? Are these like standard APIs people are calling? Or maybe it's different, given that it's an Android app versus like a Studio that's going to be calling web APIs.
Yeah, I think that we Google are building abstractions on top of this that are more easy to use from mobile.
Okay.
Right. So I think there's
light.
Yeah, there's that too, being able to run on-device models, but also accessing. In fact, I think we have a template in Studio for accessing, AI. I forgot what it's called now, but one of the templates is for putting a Gradle dependency and has some sample code for how to access the model. And so I think it comes with a demo project, right, which lets you both do a image generation, I think, and text generation.
And is this for... I thought there was a new thing in ML Kit for like prompt API and ML Kit.
Yeah. There's a bunch of, if you want to put AI in your project, there are a bunch of new libraries, but that's not something that I think Raluca or Eugene works on.
Yeah, no, and it's again something I'm completely ignorant of. Like, it's one thing to be inside a studio using the stuff that's either free or which I have an API key. It's another thing to embed it in your application. Now my application is getting distributed to people that are going to be using like tokens that I bought, or
key management is one of the challenging things.
Yeah.
All
right, so we'll get off that topic since Tor told me to.
What? You can talk a bit. I think you.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have the expertise in the room. So at DroidCon, we launched Bring Your Own Model, and so we have the local models and we have the remote models, and we support the Anthropic models, so Claude and so on, and we support OpenAI. And that also gives you more than the OpenAI models. I think we support OpenRouter. They use that API, right? So OpenRouter gives you access to dozens, hundreds of models.
A lot.
Yeah. Is there anything else we support?
Probably like this pretty much everybody, all model providers have this OpenAI compatible. They claim to be, but there could be nuances, and there could be nuances to model capabilities
I
as
see.
well.
So the thing to try is to go to their webpage, find the URL that they say to use, put that into our model provider UI, enter API key and hit refresh, and hopefully
if it don't work, file a bug to us. We'll look and probably fix if it's easy to fix. It's supposed to work.
Yeah.
Or are there tests that you write and run in CI or something that allow you to verify that any particular model works with, a standard set of prompts?
Not for a remote model, because our CI is isolated from internet, the first, and the second, it will be burning through tokens. So to test it, you need to send queries, and it'll be like...
Yeah. I just wonder, imagine a universe in which Gemini changed some fundamental thing that we didn't think was changeable, and all of a sudden prompts didn't.
This is a new thing for the studio team. We generally, we shipped a bunch of, desktop software that worked in isolation. And now that we have services that can change and do change, this is fun. So we built a bunch of support for, I don't know what the right word is, time boxing. Basically, we have a support policy now, I think 12 months, so if your studio is more than 12 months old, we don't prevent studio from working, but we get an alert that, hey, this thing is way older than the services you're accessing, so this may not work. So we had to deal with that. But yeah, this is a new fun world for us, where we actually have to carry pagers. Not that we do, I don't think, but in
so
theory.
We've had new definitions for both thinking and fun today.
Yeah.
See what else we can learn.
Yeah. I had a question. I know that when we are querying for models, we get some things like the names. What other meta information is available? Like, one thing I really would love to see is price information. Is that something we can get from these models?
Price per prompt? What do you mean by price?
Yeah.
Per token, yeah.
Per token.
Okay.
I'd like to see, so I've been testing some of these other models with my own personal API keys tied to my own personal credit card. And I'm a little nervous about how much money I'm going to spend, right? Because I don't have a good sense, especially if I try to use some of the most expensive pro models.
And we keep sending context and adding up with each prompt,
Yeah. And I didn't have a very high limit on some of those usages, and I was afraid I would run out during a demo. So I would love to be able to see how much I've spent, for example. And I'm sure there's other information too that might be interesting. Actually, one experience I had was I was using either Ollama or LM Studio, and I was using the 20 billion parameter model from OpenAI. And it didn't really work well with agent mode because it was only given an input window of like 1,000 tokens, which just isn't enough. If you open a large source file and say add comments to this file, that's more than 1,000 tokens. So it basically errored out. And I filed a bug, and Eugene was like, well, your input size is 1,000 tokens. And what I didn't realize is that it is possible to go in the UI and change the input size. So I think you added some error handling to clue users into this.
So basically those local model providers, what they do is they limit the token size with how they load the model so that the whole thing run a little bit faster. If you extend the full context length to the full whatever model supports, it could be very large. And even on good hardware, it could be painfully slow.
So it's a trade-off. You have to pick how limited the input size is.
Yeah. It sounds like another one of those mystery $X parameters that you have to track down IntelliJ's setup file somewhere.
It wasn't quite that bad, but it wasn't, to me, completely intuitive how to go and change this, because that is not something you can do in Studio. That's something you have to do in the LM Studio or Ollama itself. It's on the on the server side. So that's kind of information. So I'm just wondering, the question is what kinds of meta information do we get? Are there things we would want added to these protocols, and is there any chance of that?
Yeah, so currently there's no standard way to get this model capabilities and even human readable names to present in Studio UI.
How do we sort? It's just based on heuristics? Because we sort, because you don't want to see the oldest stuff first.
Yeah, I think the release date.
It's based on release date. And
it's the only one that you get besides the ID.
I see. So if they release some niche model later, that's going to show up higher because it's newer.
Wait, so what are we sorting? There's a list of possible models that you can add?
If you go to Open Router, for example, right, and you point to it, I get a crazy number of models, and it's sorted in some way, I think. I'm not sure exactly how. And now I'm realizing it's by release date. That makes sense.
I'm seeing the need for... So here's an application idea. I don't know how to get revenue from it because I don't know how to do that. But like a dashboard. So when graphics cards were getting prevalent way back, there were standard benchmarks that everybody would try to hit and then publish the numbers for, right? It seems like this is another domain where you want to know not only how much is it going to cost for the kinds of tokens that you send, for the kinds of artifacts that you're sending back and forth, but also what's the performance? Like what's the latency and performance
Did you
on this stuff?
just invent the concept of having leaderboards for AI models?
Yeah, I think so. But like, and maybe these exist already, and if they do, maybe the request is, could Android Studio make it easier to figure these things out locally instead of trying to figure out where is this stuff stored on the web, right? Like, could you have a dashboard? You're like, yeah, I want to try something that's not Gemini, or these are the approved models from my company. How do I, compare them so that I can...
Yeah, we're actually also announced recently that we are working on a benchmark for Android development to basically measure how good are these models at Android coding.
Yeah.
The focus is on how good they are, not how cheap they are.
Right.
But I mean, that would be interesting too, maybe.
That's an excellent segue for the question I meant to ask before and then forgot. Okay, so I'm used to using, because it's just built-in Gemini agent for coding, where I say, do this thing, and then go ahead, check it into my code. What's the worst that could happen? Are there any barriers when you're using a different model? Like, does every model understand, or is this at the studio level, like it understands all of your source code and how to integrate and how to deal with Gradle and like all the stuff around building an Android app, as opposed to just the pure logic of how do I solve this problem? Like, is there anything specific to the Gemini model that makes it easier to integrate with Android apps, or are these just models that understand text input and output and therefore hand over relatively the same code for the same problems?
I personally would say no, there aren't that many differences. And especially with tools, we send the tool descriptions. So we have a lot of metadata about what each tool does.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter if it's Gemini or OpenAI at the other side, understanding how to call Gradle Sync.
Okay.
Though some models are better about tool calling than others. They have to be trained for it. And there's some tools that they seem more excited to call than others.
Wait, when you say tool, what do you mean by that word? Like, we're not talking Android Studio tool. We're talking...
That's right. So when you run Android Studio's agent, you might notice that sometimes it calls tools. So for example, reading a file, that is a tool call. The AI, the way that the AI can have callbacks into the IDE, that's called a tool.
Okay.
And so we give it a bunch of tools.
Okay.
And so the other cool thing we launched recently were a bunch of new tools that extends the ability for the agent to do things like run your app on a device, or read logcat to see did it crash, or take a screenshot. Like, these are
Sync
tools. Sync Gradle, exactly. Yeah. And that is kind of our plan, is to keep adding to that tool set so that the agent can drive all the functionality we have in the IDE.
Okay. But one of the roadblocks I hit early on was, I think I was in the middle of a session, I'd been running it for 3 hours or so, and it stopped being able to save files. So like whatever that tool was that allows you to save files in the project, like had gone.
You mean write files? Like, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. One
so
of the
it
things
kept
that
trying. It's like, I'm trying to save this. I couldn't save the file. And then turns out restarting tools, still a good thing.
Okay.
It's an important.
That's too bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, send me the bug ID.
That was a while ago. It was like, I think it was even before I started using the Canary with the agent stuff.
Yeah. No, I like Canary. I think everyone should use Canary. We have so many cool things in Canary now.
Yeah. What's the worst that can happen to a canary?
Yeah.
Oh, wait. All right. What have we not asked? Anything else on BYOM?
So right now, the Bring Your Own model is for the agent only, right? Do we have plans to make it support things like code completion?
Wait. What? I thought the agent was the way that you talk to the models, but now it's being integrated across okay.
So there is this abstraction, right, of accessing the AI, and right now the agent is the main thing we're focusing on. But there's this other feature called code completion, or AI-powered code completion, right, which is it's not typically, from the IDE's perspective, implemented as a query as a prompt, right? There's more direct endpoints. They're way faster and more efficient. But right now, the AI-powered completion, I think, is not, like if you switch to, to Ollama or LM Studio, you're not going to have code completion to those models.
So right now, I guess on a project a few months ago, I was using Copilot because that's what the company was using. And it was doing, I guess this is where it was doing code completion, was at the Copilot level, because all of a sudden I was in the middle of a comment and it said, here's how I want to write your comment.
Yeah, that's code completion. That's right. You ghost text typically, yeah.
And Gemini is doing that right now.
That's right.
We are using that, but we don't have a way to do that with the models you bring in.
That's right.
It's a different endpoint, typically.
Okay. And I guess the reason Copilot was able to do it was it plugged in at a different level than you're plugging in BYOM. Is that right?
Yeah, for Studio, it's like we started with agent chat, but it's like the first thing that's like the most important thing to do, and the other features would be coming next.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you get it with Gemini, just that if you switch models, it's not.
Then it's still going to be Gemini completion?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Hybrid mode, we call that here in marketing.
Yeah. Let's switch to MCP. So, all right, this is a pop quiz. Chet, what does MCP stand for?
Model Context Protocol.
Excellent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, ask me what it actually means.
What does that mean?
I have no idea.
Okay. Well, I think your question about tools, is highly relevant because this is basically a way to add tools. Do you want to extend that answer?
Basically, each MCP server can add a collection of very specific tools that are maybe specific to a domain that we wouldn't necessarily integrate with. So you can configure MCP servers to help you with browser automation if you have the kind of project that requires interacting with a browser, or talking to a database if you have the kind of project that is also backed by a database. So you can bring all these other, not necessarily niche, but domain-specific tools into the main prompt and have these extra tools help the agent publish, your pull request to GitHub.
So GitHub, for example, has an MCP server.
Right. Yes.
So,
I do
we don't have
example.
built-in support for it, but if you set up that MCP server, now you can, in the agent, say, make a pull request out of this,
yes,
for example.
If the exact type of tools are different for any domain, like I don't understand how you make a generic connection between someone typing a prompt and a tool executing something.
Well, someone should come up with a protocol for that.
Oh, model context
That's
protocol. Okay.
That's right. That's what this is.
And
so it lets you insert your own tools. Like we have a bunch of built-in tools, and MCP lets you extend that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what that is.
And there's a standard protocol for querying for what are the available tools on each server, and you have, of course, a basic protocol for keeping the transport layer alive and pinging and getting notifications if the tools changed.
Yeah.
Because you can also have maybe more dynamic servers that decide to change the list of available tools based on some internal state or something.
Okay. All right. So take me through the GitHub example then. So Gemini doesn't have any inherent understanding. Is that right? Gemini doesn't.
The agent. Gemini
agent
itself doesn't have any built-in tools. Agents are what adds the tools.
Okay. So the agents, by default, at least when it first came out, had no idea what GitHub was or how to interact with it. And now you have a tool that allows that. How do you connect the dots so that when I type a prompt, it knows, oh, I have a tool for that? Right. You said protocol, but how does that protocol work when it didn't used to know how to do that and now it knows how to bundle up information and send it?
So as a developer, you know that there is this GitHub MCP server. There's a small code snippet that you copy into our settings. That is basically the endpoint, the URL endpoint. This is the github.com URL for the server. And right now we support token-based authentication, but we will soon support OAuth. So there might be another step that you need to take to get a token for your GitHub account. So you put that in the mcp.json in Android Studio, and then we automatically launch the server, manage the authentication on your behalf, get the list of tools, and add them automatically to any prompts, so that we will have a tool for creating a pull request. So if you're talking to the agent about changes that you eventually want pushed out to GitHub, the agent will eventually realize that, okay, there's this final tool I need to call, create pull request.
Okay.
So in Studio, you can type /tools. We have some slash commands like /clear. /tools will list the current tools that are available. And once you've added MCP, you'll see the MCP available tools as well. So you'll see a handful of new tools from the GitHub MCP server.
I'm missing the magic step where it knows, like in a prompt that I do,
So what you're not
want
seeing,
to
when
commit
you type a prompt, when you say, add comments to this file, we're not just sending that to the model. Gemini's getting this whole system prompt where we're teaching it basic things like you're an Android developer, you like Kotlin, right? So it has all that other stuff and all the tools. The tools are not built into Gemini or others. So we're telling it these tools, and we're also now including the MCP ones. So it's being told, hey, here's the question, add comments to this file. You have available these 30 tools. That's going to be 10 of them is going to be the GitHub ones.
Yep.
That's how the model then knows, the user asked to make a pull request.
But how does it know that this tool can handle a pull request? This new tool that got added.
When you type /tools, you'll see the tool names and the description. So it's being told, hey, I have a tool called create pull request. Right? And the model goes like, oh, that looks relevant. Let me call that one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And does it do like a multiplier? Like, it seems like these 5 tools could possibly handle this thing.
Yeah.
Will it like call all of those tools and then sift through the answers?
When you see the new stuff we just launched around we have a new project agent, and what it does at the end of creating a new project is make sure that it actually works. And then it is creating these interesting flows of let me first deploy the app, then I'm going to look at logcat, look for crashes, and I'm also going to, call the ADB input tool to touch the screen, and then I'm going to call the screenshot tool to see did it go to the next screen. So yes, that is what makes a good model, the ones that can make complex tool calls.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I get so excited. I just totally jump in.
That's fine.
I think that describes this entire episode, actually.
Yeah. So.
Some of the things in your team you work a little more on. But did I say more on? Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. So model context protocol. I get it.
And we're doing authentication for
Figma. At the moment, Figma is fully supported. So
can you explain that feature? What is that we've done with Figma?
So before, there used to be a model context protocol server in the Figma desktop app. So you had to install Figma and then configure some developer option, and then you could connect to the local instance and have Studio look at your designs and maybe generate code. Right now, we have managed to port our MCP support to work with the remote server. So you no longer need to download anything. You have an account with Figma, you have your projects and your designs there. You just point again to a URL. This is the endpoint, and we support OAuth. So you'll be taken to log in automatically. You don't need to specify any tokens or do anything else.
The last time I saw a Figma design at Google many years ago, a few years ago, I think they had the entire UI of many, many screens all on one page of a Figma artifact. So I can imagine sending that to the model and the model being like, I have no idea what to do with this information. Maybe they've gotten a little more focused now. I don't know.
There are a couple of tools in the Figma MCP server. So I think that helps the model ask about a specific design and
helpful.
List the designs. And
I've seen a very cool demo of this in action. I hope it's online somewhere. Okay, anything else on MCP?
You know the joke about the S stands for security?
That's really good.
The S in MCP stands for security, because we were discussing about tool descriptions, but there's no one verifying the tool descriptions. So you have an MCP server that could describe its tools as reading and writing files. And then what guarantees do you have that we're not going to use that to read and write files?
Wow, that's a really good warning. So this is very much a user beware.
Right. So with remote MCP servers and the ones that support OAuth, of course, they're trusted. But if you have local MCP servers that you download the code from somewhere and you just run locally, I mean, we don't know where the code is going.
Cool. What could possibly go wrong? All right.
I know you wanted to talk a bit about using agents in general. So, are you using agents for your own development, and what is your experience so far?
I am. I have fully embraced the vibe coding.
Right.
Yes. And I'm using agents to plan and then to basically itemize the list of features that I want to implement, and then use the agents to, again, implement each feature, verify all of.
So I'm curious about that approach, because the stuff that I've done, like, I'm really impressed with what it has been able to do for me. However, I am in that state where, like, I'm the perfect use case because I'm starting each of my projects from scratch. Like, I have a little utility app in mind and I start from a new project and I go. But if you're doing it on a very large source base with so much context and folders and projects and sub-project, like all this stuff that you have going on in Studio, that seems a little bit harder to integrate with. Is that not right?
Just to clarify, you are using the agent on the Android Studio code base, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's just that you have to have a very, tight leash on the agent. And that means you need a very tight verification loop. How would I figure out immediately if the generated AI code is wrong? So I'm thinking about tests first, because if I ask the AI to generate something, I want to have the test fail or pass, depending on that. I'm also curating the context with agents.md. and leaving instructions for how to run a Gradle build, how to run the tests, how to do other kinds of verification.
That's a feature we've launched. It's been a while now, but it was after our last Studiobot conversation on this podcast. So we could just mention briefly, what is the agents.md?
Agent.md, it's a file you put into along your source code in the folders, and that telling agent what this code is about, how to deal with it, what's like other instruction. Basically, when you're trying to work with files in some particular like folder, or like you could have an agent.md like for general for your project.
Is this something that people edit manually?
Yeah.
Or is generated by Studio according to some projects?
Currently, you write it yourself.
Yeah. It's like readmd, but for agents.
Yeah.
So what to do with this code?
It automatically gets added to the prompt.
And is there information in it? Like, how do people find out what the language is, what they're supposed to say?
I think if you go to agents.md on the web, because this is a, we basically decided to just use the established convention.
Oh, okay. This is
not something that,
got it.
Yeah. So you have agents.md that you are using to make sure, and tests, test-driven development.
And are you also using agents to create the test? Because the last conversation we had about this stuff was with people working on testing, although that was maybe for Android apps, not Studio. So, like, what integration for testing is there with all the agents?
We have a bunch of custom stuff inside Studio.
Okay. So you're just writing manual tests the way you always have?
No. Sometimes I ask the model to give me a list of corner cases. So I'm looking for the more higher level aspect. What am I missing? Look at the list of tests and tell me other corner cases that I'm omitting. Or fine, maybe in some particular cases I ask it to generate the test, but I'm more concerned about what am I missing.
And I think one thing that's not widely appreciated yet for our agent is that the agent has access to the code index. So even in large projects, what some other agents do is they will do like, let me try list files. Now let me grep those files. That is not going to work in a project with millions of lines of source code. But because this agent's running in Studio, and we've given it a code search tool, which is hooked up to the index, that means if you ask, hey, where is ... it'll find it like that.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty good at operating on even large source trees, I would say.
I guess one of the questions that I had, if you're using agents on a large, complex source base, is how much does it need to consume to answer any question you may ask? Like, does it really need to take a step back and suck in all of your code to say, okay, you just asked about changing line 42. Let me just go back and look at the 17,000 files first. I'm saying, like, when you start up, obviously not on each prompt, but like, how much context does it need? Or can you in agents.md or somewhere say, I'm only looking at this folder? Like, really don't go look at, Esteban's code or whatever, right?
It seems to default to looking narrowly.
Okay. So when you're dealing with a file, it won't just go out looking at the rest of
I think
project.
It depends on how, the more you use the agent, the more you understand what it's capable of, and then you kind of get good at knowing when to ask it and when not to, I would say.
Yeah, my experience, I had to tell the agent to make sure that it looks at the surrounding code, because by default it will not.
The surrounding files or the surrounding code in the function that you're looking at?
Files.
Yeah, okay.
And make sure that, I don't know, it's consistent with the coding style and with the other patterns.
And that's the kind of thing you could put in agents.md instead of putting it in the prompt each time.
Yeah.
How about you, Eugene? How much do you use the agent?
Like the same use cases, Raluca. One thing that I found like particularly useful, it's to kickstart the work, like get back in the flow when there's some task you need to do and you like don't really want to do, like procrastinating it a lot, and you could ask agent to start work for you, and then you like, oh, you're doing this wrong, let me fix it, and then like, okay, 2 hours passed and you're done with it.
Like write my performance review packet for this quarter.
Yeah.
Well, I think especially with the models are getting better. I would say some months back, it wasn't always what I would check in, but it was a good start. And it was, it's a good start, and that's more than like starting from scratch.
Yeah,
so it's that same thing where like, okay, yeah, I can fix it after you do the basics. Now it's getting better and better at like not needing all that extra help. So you've been using Agent too. What's been your experience?
Yes. It's kind of amazing. So I was using the chat first, and then I was having a conversation with you this summer, and you said, you should really get the Canary. And you should check out
Switch to agent mode, yeah.
Which had just come online. This is like, I
July,
think
we shipped it in July.
Yeah, through July, I was using the chat, and I was basically getting suggestions on things, and that was kind of amazing to begin with, just in terms of, I think the main benefit to me at that point was, in order to do the thing that I need to do, I'm going to have to deal with APIs that I've never even heard of, or like I don't understand the domain. Maybe it's like some web endpoint REST API. I'm not a REST API kind of guy.
And don't want to be.
And I don't want to be. I'm not interested in that element of my app. I just would like some solution to that problem so that I can go work on the interesting stuff. And so that really helped with that. And then when you suggested getting the Canary mode, then I just started writing these little utility apps, and I would spend a half a day to 2 days on something, cranking out an app that I've had in mind for 5 years, because I always had that barrier to entry of, the tedium of just getting the basics working, usually because of some new API. So like I have an app that transcribes, like a very quick UI for just transcribing a thought that I have and saving a file. And I thought, I know there's a transcription API out there, and I'm sure it's awesome, but I don't want to learn it. Like just learning that would have taken me a day, a few days, whatever, and I could never sort of get that time. And the ability to go out and ask someone else to learn it for me and emit the code that did that, and then integrate the code, and then all of a sudden I was off and running. And then given my experience on that one, then the next week I was like, oh, what I've always wanted was an app that did the following. And then I wrote that app in another day. And so for me, the huge benefit was tackling apps that just kind of sat in the back of my mind and bothered me, because I never wanted to break through the tedium to get to the interesting part. But then the twofold thing of learning and using APIs that I don't need to be an expert in to at least get the basics going. And also the tedium of writing code that is dead simple, but would take a couple of minutes that I didn't want to waste. So like my canonical example was, I was writing an app where like I had a bunch of strings, just like plain text strings sitting around. These were titles of movies, and I just wanted a data structure holding. Okay, not difficult code, right? 5 minutes later, I would have had exactly what I wanted. But the fact that I could point at the agent at it and say, take this text and create a list of strings, and 5 seconds later, there was my list of strings instead of 3 minutes of tedious typing. Like that, those two use cases were killer use cases for me. I'm like, oh, I get it. Yeah, this is good.
So
this is not me replacing. Yeah, I think there's promise in it. And this is not me replacing like super interesting, hard technical problem stuff with, a bot. This is like, why shouldn't tools do this for us?
By the way, one aspect which I didn't consider before was, now I have the ability to try out multiple things in parallel and not necessarily commit to an implementation decision, because it's so cheap to ask the agent, show me or sketch how it would look like if I used protobufs.
Yeah.
How would it look like if I used JSON?
Yeah.
I can continue with the agent on separate tracks, and it's cheaper, and I don't have to write all the code. I don't have to learn about the technologies.
Yeah.
But then I can evaluate and pick one at the very end instead of doing all of this by myself and having to commit early because, I don't want to learn how to do the JSON part.
That's the tagline for this episode, I think. I don't want to learn.
So how does that work in practice in terms of, so like the agent stuff that I'm doing right now, I'm always just doing like a one-track thing and then it commits the code. If you do several, like do you have it committed but then back it out? Or do you like commit to a certain point so then you can always like backtrack to that commit and try the next one? Or do you have like parallel projects where you're trying these things? Like just how does it work practically? Git
and different branches.
Oh, okay.
I wish we would support the Git work tree stuff because that's an easy way to have the agent work in parallel with you on the same code base. But yeah, it's mostly version control and leaving always. So asking the agent to summarize when I know that the context window is kind of full, to summarize all the remaining to-dos, all the remaining tasks, so that even if I restart the computer, I can then point it later at this was your previous work. The next item to do is this. And I can start with a semi-fresh context window.
I've heard of people who like will do a bunch of agent stuff in parallel and they're seeing like this major multiplier on their time. And I haven't gotten to that phase yet. I have a single friend, which I mean, that tracks. So I haven't figured out how to take advantage of the part where you could have it doing things either in parallel or next to that and then sort of evaluating multiple steps, but that seems pretty useful.
So you manage the teams that do Studiobot. There's a bunch of other stuff coming. Anything else you want to highlight?
Should I? I don't know. What do you have in mind?
What's not? Okay. Yeah. No, we did launch a bunch of things. We talked about most of them, I think. We did threads, checklist, planning mode, bring your own model. And there's more to come.
Yeah, I'm excited about more local model integration and getting more features supporting bring your own model. I'm excited about, of course, tools and how to better manage tools so that you don't exhaust the context window. So there are a couple of interesting things happening there. Actually, in MCP, the most recent blog post was about code execution. So whatever we discussed so far about tools in the prompt with descriptions and whatnot, you can remove all of that. An MCP server will now be a sandbox for code execution. And you can just say, I have this list tools tool, and the LLM can call that. And then I will respond with the descriptions of the tools. But all of this is done via code execution. So the LLM will generate code, TypeScript, that gets evaluated in the context of the MCP server.
It's moving so incredibly fast. It's hard to believe if we go and look at where were we 12 months ago and where are we now.
Yes.
It's kind of unbelievable. It's very exciting. Agent mode, just use it.
Try it out. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.